Simon, I am super excited for this conversation because one, Stripe just dropped their annual letter, and two, you just did an exclusive interview with John Collison on that annual letter.
Now at Stripe scale, Stripe is basically acting as a reputation network.
Their total processed volume was $1.4 trillion, not billion, which is massive. That's 40% year-on-year growth.
Fraudsters are adopting these new technologies faster than we are to combat them. Awesome. Simon, one, Stripe just dropped their annual letter, and two, you just did an exclusive interview with John Collison on that annual letter.
Yeah, that was fun. A bucket list moment, check, right there.
Yeah, I want you to unpack high level everything in the letter, and then I thought we could dive into some of those clips and talk through them sequentially. They're talking about everything from massive investments in stablecoins to why Europe is drifting into obsolescence and a lot of good stuff. But yeah, give us the headlines first.
So the bullet points, their total processed volume was $1.4 trillion, not billion, which is massive. That's 40% year-on-year growth. They added a casual $400 billion. They acquired, of course, Bridge for $1.1 billion, and Stripe billing made $500 million, just the billing engine, which is absolutely incredible. And some smaller stats that I picked out were they have 80% of the Forbes Cloud 100 as clients. They have 78% of the Forbes AI 50 as clients, and the transaction processing volume of their clients is growing 7x faster than the S&P 500, which is just sort of tells you everything you need to know about their business in a nutshell. So there's lots of other things we can kind of unpack. They talk about fraud. They talk about European dynamism. They talk a lot about kind of the nature of enterprise and billing and stablecoin, agentic commerce, which is a fascinating topic in its own right.
And the headlines are all really good, and you think that, oh, you could just kind of like sit on your laurels. But to me, another big takeaway from this letter was how concerned they are about fighting to stay relevant for decades, because they know everything is changing faster than ever before, and so they're also not sitting still.
Yeah, I asked that question right up front. Like, you guys have a different approach to capital allocation and raising. You're doing it all in the private markets. There's no attempt really to go public. And they said, yeah, we're profitable and we're spending it all on R&D because we are thinking in multiple decades. And I sort of asked the question, how do you stay close to whatever the heck is next? Because whether it's stablecoins or AI, you seem to be the obvious choice for developers, even though like the 15-year-old company now, like there are younger companies that have gone public, but they're not as obsessed with that sort of cutting edge stuff. And I think that's just what makes Stripe Stripe.
Yeah. And let's go ahead and just cut to the first clip where John's talking about Stripe billing. And in this clip, he's talking about how companies hate their billing systems and why that's been such a big opportunity for Stripe.
If you talk to any company, or talk to the CIO at any company, the billing system is absolutely doing their head in. It makes it harder for them to close their books. They are blocked on being able to launch new products on it. And, you can sometimes get this effect where the cobbler's children are going unshod, where you'll have, one of the leading Silicon Valley tech companies, and they're off inventing new kinds of chips and, teaching Silicon to think and everything like that. But their billing system is the thing holding them back from actually being able to launch. And so Stripe Billing is a solution for that, where we think it's really important that people have perfectly reliable billing systems, but also they have the ability to launch new products and expand internationally and things like that. And so I would say Stripe Billing is really optimized not for like a static product offering, but it's optimized for the reality in which companies live, which is they have very dynamic product offerings. They're launching new things, or they're testing new prices, or they're expanding to a new market or something like that. And again, as we talk to legacy companies, they're traditionally held up by their billing systems, and we want to help them fix that. So we've seen fabulous adoption, in particular among a lot of, consumer media companies, and also a lot of SaaS companies, folks of the likes of Atlassian or Intercom or people like that, where they're building their billing stack on top of Stripe Billing.
And what are your immediate takeaways from his conversation around billing?
I mean, you can see why it's hitting 500 million ARR if you go getting all of the AI companies, and they're all hitting billions themselves in ARR. then they're going to be needing to bill their customers for that in the subscriptions.
Yeah.
So that's where the money's coming from. And they are, if they've got 80% of the cloud Forbes 100, those companies, when they're building new products and they're billing for them, they're using Stripe billing. So they've kind of, by being the payment acceptance default, become the default for the billing product. And having flexibility to launch and manage new products is a really key thing. Also, I'd never heard the phrase, the cobbler's children are going unshod before. They have no shoes. But that's
why we need
favorite.
more Irish founders in the tech ecosystem, I think.
100%. Heck yeah.
Something
Your
that really
thoughts?
hit close to home for me, I've been a software engineer at fintech companies for a long time, and I never worked on the billing system because it was always a disaster. And if you're the engineer working on the billing system, no one ever says, thank you, the payment got processed correctly. Instead, what happens is someone is very angry and calling and saying, why is this amount wrong? Why is this broken? Why didn't this not go through? And these systems are mission critical, incredibly hard to maintain. And that's why it's such a big opportunity to build a billing system. And I think the other takeaway is just John is very excited to talk about their new products and where the company is headed, not just about the core processing platform.
Yeah, heck yeah. Fascinating to watch. Should we do the next one?
Let's do the next one. And on this one, I think he's been listening to you, Simon, because he's talking about fraud.
Yeah, we spent a lot of time discussing fraud because, firstly, it's a big issue for businesses. Businesses generally lose 3% of their revenue each year to fraud, and that can be, many different types. If you're handling cash or inventory, it can be, the euphemistically named shrinkage. There's the issues now of spear phishing and deepfakes and things like that. And obviously, people in our industry are familiar with all the problems of credit card fraud. And what's nice is that now at Stripe scale, Stripe is basically acting as a reputation network. And so when a card is used on Stripe, 92% of the time we have seen that card be used somewhere else before. And so what it means is we're not just looking out for kind of known bad behavior, even though we do certainly look out for that. We can even have a sense of goodness and reputation on the network. And so we can really use that to drive down fraud for merchants on Stripe. And we really have. We've reduced it by 80%.
And there he's talking about the importance of networks and fraud, which is something you've driven home a lot at Sardine.
And I think what he's reacting to is, and everything you see is them following their customer. And if merchants, if platforms, if vertical SaaS companies, if fintech companies are coming to you and saying, I've got a problem, then you need to be talking about that problem. And Stripe is a bit of a bellwether of that, and you can really see it in the things that they're talking about. And I think it is just a fact that, we have a problem as an industry, and he's reflecting that.
And they call out in the letter, but he doesn't mention it here, that fraudsters are adopting these new technologies faster than we are to combat them. And LLMs are really good at tracking things that change slowly within the information architecture of the internet, and very bad at tracking things that happen fast, like fraudsters' reactions to strategies. So the tooling
and
layer,
they don't have to get approval from anybody. You don't have to do BSR 11-7 compliant. You don't have to think about fair lending. You don't have to think about any of the BSA AML guidelines or the CFPB's rules around explainability if you're using these things. Fraudsters just get to use the tools, and they are adversarial and they're very, very quick. Yeah, he's bringing it up because it's a huge problem, and I think we've all got to focus on it and get better.
Yep, I had Zach Parrott's 2025 FinTech predictions. Number one, it was the year that everyone starts caring a lot about fraud. Should we roll the next clip?
Yeah.
All right, diving into companies like Scale and AI and why they're using stablecoins.
We think stablecoins are a really big deal and going to be a major part of the payment ecosystem going forward, and we're seeing a lot of pull. What's interesting is we're seeing a lot of crypto trends have started at the consumer or retail level, but we're seeing a lot of pull from businesses for stablecoin tooling. I mean, that's what Bridge does, the company that we just acquired. They sell to businesses, and you have a lot of companies that want to manage global corporate treasury. They're moving money around the world. They want to do it in stablecoins. We talked about the use case of if you want to pay out, Scale AI, paying out contract workers using stablecoins. But again, if you're trying to do that, task of paying out people around the world, I mean, sure, yeah, in the US, in Europe, we've pretty well developed payment systems for these things. As you start going further afield, it gets pretty, expensive, it gets slow, and so stablecoins are actually a really nice solution for that. And so that's what we're seeing, that's what we're investing in is, building a platform for orchestrating stablecoins and using them in kind of regular money movement. And we think they'll be a big part of that going forward.
I mean, I've talked about stablecoins a lot, and I think part of the reason is there's this really interesting bifurcation now of like the meme coin consumer conversation and the stablecoin payments institutional conversation. They could not be more different. It was the Bank of America CEO was on Bloomberg with, I think it was David Rubenstein just yesterday, talking about, if they see regulation coming in the next 6 to 12 months as is predicted, Bank of America is going to enter that game. And that's a really powerful signal that there is pull coming from the market, because it seems like everybody's been waiting for this regulatory clarity, and that ability to have that instant cross-border payment rail that's dollar-based is such a game changer. You talk about like billing is hard. Moving money across borders is still stupidly hard, and somebody's made it like as easy as sending an email. All you need is like the Stripe API. Like it's really, really much better when it works. So again, they're the bellwether. Typically what they're talking about is what their customers are asking for. And to me, this says that stablecoins are not just a thing that's a headline that you're getting VCs excited because Stripe acquired Bridge. They're a thing because customers are buying the product.
Stablecoins are real. The trends are interesting, exciting, seem to be accelerating. I think there's also an interesting conversation on how this acquisition reflects on the long-term orientation of Stripe's strategy and culture. Microsoft announced the Majorana, the first quantum chip. That's been 30 years in development. Satya was like, I am the third CEO to get excited about quantum. John and Patrick refer to stablecoins as room temperature semiconductors.
Superconductors.
Right? Little bit of physics envy going on there. Yeah, room temperature superconductors. But I think what it points to is you need to be making these long-term bets about where things are headed if you want to stay relevant as a company. And that stablecoins is one way that Stripe is doing that.
Completely. Look, I mean, the thing I said at the beginning of my Q&A, which you'll see on the newsletter, is I congratulated John on the launch of the ARC Institute, which is something they're doing around biology and AI. They've created a large language model where they can do DNA sequencing, and it can generate DNA sequences. It can generate entire new solutions to problems. Even though it's only ever seen one human genome, it can correctly predict genetic faults within the human species. It's absolutely incredible. So this is not the type of founder who's thinking in quarterly cycles by any stretch.
That's a great lead into the next clip. He spends about a third of the letter talking about Europe's economic growth or lack of economic growth over the last 30 years. So let's roll that.
We're very passionate about Europe getting this right. We think that it's healthy that a bit more of a discussion has opened up on the competitiveness gap. And I think the Draghi report, in the spirit of being helpful, I think the difference in financing structures is interesting to note and point out. And then I think the regulatory encumbrances have been much talked about, but we're just going to stay talking about them until they're fixed.
He also said in the interview that he sort of briefly mentioned it there, the Draghi report. If you've not seen the Mario Draghi report, it's absolutely phenomenal. It basically puts all of Europe on blast and says, stop trying to regulate your way out of a growth crisis. Winston Churchill once had a saying that trying to do something along those lines was like standing inside of a bucket and lift yourself up by the handles of the bucket. It's physically impossible to do. It's an exercise in futility. And the other thing he points to there is not just the regulation. He points to the fact that financing is a huge gap in Europe. From 2008 onwards, you can see the split in productivity growth. And a large thing that happened in the US is private credit, Apollo, Blackstone, KKR, came in and delivered facilities to a very diverse credit ecosystem, whether it's auto, whether it's home lending, whether it's whatever. When the banks pulled back, the US had other options. Europe did not. When the banks pulled back, so did the whole economy. And we need that diversity of credit input.
Yep.
And we need something that's a little bit more entrepreneur friendly, because it's not in that quote, but he goes, if you talk to entrepreneurs in the UK or in Europe, it's no bueno. And frankly, I mean, look, I'm talking to an American. I spend more time in the States than any other country aside from my house, in the UK. That is on purpose, because it's where the opportunity is. And that's not because we lack talent. We have all of the talent in the world. My goodness, let me show you some talented folks around here. And we do have incredible global businesses like a Revolut, like a Klarna, like a Spotify. They happen, but they're the exception, not the rule. And then when they get big enough, what do? They list on the NASDAQ. So we really need to fix this.
Yeah, and if you dive into the letter too, specifically what he's calling Europe out on is their regulations in the labor market, saying it's reduced the allocative efficiency of human capital. Basically, European companies struggle to hire and fire. Therefore, people tend to end up at lower productivity jobs, and they just kind of hang out. And that's dragged down economic growth by nearly 2 percentage points per year, which is massive. That's the difference between 1% and 3% growth compounded over 10, 20, 30 years is why Europe is falling a lot farther behind the U.S.
Yeah, there's a thing in the U.S. that I'd never seen until I worked for an American company called an at-will employment contract, which is you're employed at the will of the company, and your notice is like a week. And in Europe, your notice is typically like at least a month to 3 months. And then there's this idea of working your notice, the idea that you pay the company back once you've resigned. You still try and, work that period of time, that 3 months between moving things. And it just creates a lack of momentum in the economy more broadly. And if you can't fire the underperformers, you can't hire the high achievers. And that is an issue. And whilst I'm sensitive to labor protections, I'm a big fan of having free public health care. I think it's a phenomenal thing.
It's a lot easier to pay for free public health care if you've got another 10 trillion in GDP.
And you need to grow the denominator. You need the growth. And you can't regulate your way to growth.
I think the last thing we should touch on, we don't have a clip of, is the importance of AI for Stripe's business and for Stripe's customers. I thought the main chart I want to talk about, which is just super interesting ecosystem level observation, is they've tracked their fastest growing 100 customers, and the time it takes them to reach 5 million in revenue has compressed. It used to take about 3 years. Now it's happening in 24 months. So Stripe, which processes payments for a lot of young companies as well as at-scale AI companies, is seeing this level of creative destruction as well as just rapid growth from AI happen within their own customer base. And obviously that's good for them.
It's good for them, but then there's the question on the other side of like, this is the topic on everyone's lips, and we did talk about this in the blog itself, which is how will AI agents pay for things? Because he gives the example of like, I like this shirt. It's a little bit worn out. I've probably got the receipt sitting somewhere in my email. You could probably find out who the merchant was. You could probably use a card and just go order me another one and deliver it to my address. Please go do that. That doesn't exist today. And I want that to exist, and that would be really cool. Could you just do a weekly shop for me and, kind of order my groceries, but like change some stuff up and come up with a new menu? Like that's entirely possible from an LLM, and we've got all of the pieces of it. The problem is, what happens when that agent gets to checkout? Because there's a few ways that can play out right now. Most of the time, if you've used OpenAI's operator or anything like it, it goes, I'm stuck. Can you give me your card details, please? And then you have to enter them, and it squirts them into. That's kind of janky. That's like a step backwards. And
reading between the lines here, I think you're making a prediction that their 20 2025 or 2026 annual letter is going to talk about AI agents and payments.
Well, they already have an SDK,
Yeah.
right? Like they already have. So if you have Perplexity Pro, this is a pro tip. Go search for a product like TVs on Perplexity Pro. It's worth paying the subscription just to do this. And what happens is the first time you do it, you enter your card details and up pops Stripe Link, and it asks you to store those credentials, or if you've already got Stripe Link, then you can opt in to giving your agent a virtual card. And this is wild. So now your agent...
On Stripe issuing.
On Stripe
Link,
issuing.
Probably, yeah.
Yep, Stripe Link and Stripe issuing coming together. So they get a one-time use virtual card for that specific merchant with a set of limits, and they can navigate to the website and make the payment. And of course, if it's a Stripe checkout on the other side, they know they're receiving an agent payment, and they can really streamline that process for you. And if it's not a Stripe checkout, then they just enter the card for credentials. Now, if everybody in the world used Stripe checkout, that experience would be incredible. But the world of payments is complex and fragmented, and that will never be reality. So we have a fundamental problem, because what Stripe's built is really cool, and it's a good demo. But there's this question of, like, how does the merchant know that this AI agent is really acting on behalf of Rex? Because the AI agent could have Rex's credentials, but where did it get them from? Is it a good agent, or is it a bad agent? Like, there's some 007 movie titles that are running through my head here. Bad agents, double agents. And then... maybe you've got like a really good agent, but a bad user who's stolen a load of cards.
Yeah.
And like, how do you know that they've not stolen that stuff? So yeah, like, how do you know that this agent coming to your e-commerce site is a good one? That's something I'm spending a lot of time thinking about. And the answer is probably some mix of Anthropic's model context protocol, and LLMs.txt instead of robots.txt, and Agent Auth, which is this crazy idea I'm working on and I proposed in a brain food a few months ago. So work in progress, but that space, everybody's trying to figure that out at the moment, and they're right there with it. And I think that constant vigilance...
agents, wallets, cards, like these are going to be big, interesting things. Yeah.
Yes, it is.
I mean, the thing that really drove home how we're getting towards this world was the demo you posted of two AI agents talking to each other over audio, where one says, "Hi, I'm an AI agent," and the other one says, "Oh, I am too." And then they're like, "Do you want to talk in robot?" And they start beeping at each other like R2-D2, and the throughput of the conversation 10x's. And you're like, "Oh my God, like this is starting to happen." It just
that was a demo by 11 Labs. If you've got the footage, you should just roll that little piece. It's really cool.
It is really good. We'll try and roll that maybe here for it. Well, awesome, Simon. I mean, super interesting to go through Stripe's letter. A lot of good fundamental growth, 40% year-over-year growth, 1.4 trillion in volumes. But I think we spent all the time really talking about the future, and that's because so much is changing faster than ever. So I'm going to look forward to their letter next year too.
Yeah, he did allude to a little something, which is, again, you've got to read the text version for this, which is, finance is a lumpy business, he said. And one of the reasons they like to sort of not necessarily go public is to invest throughout that cycle. So 2024 was a big year of growth. I think it's signaling that 25 might not be quite as big.
Yeah, if you want to pull out the one bet, and I mentioned this in a LinkedIn post I did on the letter, he said, 2024 was exceptional. Revenue growth is lumpy, which is hinting that, 2025 is going to be different. But different in a period of transition. It's obviously better to have growth, but you at least need to be positioning yourself to catch the next wave. And so I think that's what they're hinting at is, hey, like even if this is a lumpy or, not as good of a year, we're trying to catch the next big waves.
Good for them. Well, it was a real pleasure to do it. I hope I get to do it again someday.
All right. See you around.